It was August 15, 1971, a quiet Sunday night in America. Most people were watching TV, unaware that their financial future was being rewritten behind closed doors. At Camp David, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television and, in a calm but firm tone, announced a single sentence that changed the global economy forever. I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily. That word was a lie that would last more than half a century. For the first time in modern history, money was no longer backed by anything real. The dollar, once tied to gold at $35 per ounce, was now just paper, or more precisely a promise. A promise backed only by faith, and by the power of the U.S. government. That night, Nixon didn't just close the gold window. He opened a new era, one built on credit, debt, and illusion. The Bretton Woods system that had anchored the world's currencies since 1944 was dead. And in its place rose something far more dangerous, a system where value was detached from reality. At first, it felt liberating. The United States could print money without worrying about gold reserves. Governments could spend freely, stimulate growth, wage wars, and promise everything to everyone, without having to earn it. Economists called it monetary flexibility. In truth, it was legalized counterfeiting. Between 1971 and 2025, the U.S. money supply exploded by more than 4,000%. Debt became the new foundation of prosperity. Instead of gold, America exported dollars, and the world accepted them gladly, because everyone needed them to trade. The dollar became not just a currency, but a weapon. The United States could sanction nations, crash economies, and finance wars simply by controlling access to the global reserve currency. But with every dollar printed came a silent cost. Real wages stagnated. Inequality soared. The middle class, once the backbone of America, started to hollow out. And the world, addicted to cheap credit, began to spin faster and faster toward a cliff no one wanted to see. The oil shocks of the 1970s, the tech bubbles of the 2000s, the housing collapse of 2008, and the debt crisis of 2020 all trace their origins back to that night in 1971. When the link between money and reality was severed, chaos became inevitable. It just took decades to show its full face. By 2025, for half a century, the United States shaped the global economy with one simple mechanism: the dollar. Every trade, every loan, every barrel of oil, every ounce of gold, it all flowed through the same financial bloodstream. The world had to use dollars, and that dependence made America the center of everything. But in 2025, the tide has turned. Slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Inflation has eaten away the illusion of prosperity. The national debt now towers beyond $36 trillion, an impossible mountain growing faster than the economy itself. Interest payments alone devour more money than the entire U.S. military budget. Behind the confident speeches and manipulated statistics, something fundamental has broken. The trust that once made the dollar sacred is fading, and without trust, even the mightiest currency becomes paper. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is no longer waiting. Across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, a new system is forming. It's not announced in headlines or global summits. It's being built transaction by transaction, quietly replacing the old order. China and Russia settle energy trades in yuan and rubles. India buys Iranian oil with rupees. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar since 1973, now sells crude to Beijing in Chinese currency. The shift that Washington swore would never happen is already underway. Central banks are racing to protect themselves. In 2024 alone, they purchased more gold than in any year since the 1960s. They are dumping U.S. treasuries and converting reserves into real assets. This is not speculation, it's insurance. For the first time in modern history, the world is preparing for life after the dollar. The irony is bitter. For decades, America used its currency as both shield and sword. Sanctions, financial blockades, asset freezes, the dollar was a weapon. But every time Washington used that weapon, it gave the rest of the world a reason to build defenses. The SWIFT system, once untouchable, now has a rival, SIPS. The IMF's dominance is challenged by the BRICS Bank. And digital trade platforms bypass Western banks entirely. The empire of money, once invisible and absolute, is being outcoded, outmined, and outmaneuvered. Inside the US, the consequences are undeniable. The middle class that once defined the American dream is crumbling under the weight of debt. Real wages have stagnated for decades. Housing, healthcare, education, everything costs more, while the promise of upward mobility has turned into a cruel joke. The cost of global dominance is now being paid domestically. Every empire that printed its way to power eventually had to face its own arithmetic. America is no exception. Technology is accelerating the transition. Nations are building digital payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. The blockchain, once dismissed as a playground for speculators, is now becoming the architecture of a new world order. Countries like Brazil, India, and China experiment with state-backed digital currencies. Africa launches regional payment platforms that settle instantly, without Wall Street intermediaries. For the first time since 1945, global trade is being rebuilt without needing the American banking system. This isn't collapse, it's correction. A slow but inevitable rebalancing of global power. The next world order won't be dominated by one currency, but by a multipolar system where trade is diversified and sovereignty is financial again. The West sees chaos. The rest of the world sees liberation, and yet there's a tragedy in this story. The United States could have led the transition. It could have reinvented its economy around innovation, production, and real value. Instead, it chose denial. It chose to preserve illusions, to print, to borrow, to inflate, to manipulate data until truth became dangerous. Every empire believes it's different until it's not. The Spanish had silver, the British had ships, the Soviets had ideology, and America had the dollar. All believed their power was eternal. All were wrong. The real end won't come with a crash, but with indifference. When oil is no longer priced in dollars, when nations trade freely in their own currencies, when global markets stop caring about what the Federal Reserve says, when the empire will have fallen, quietly, elegantly, irreversibly. And when historians look back, they won't point to a single catastrophe. They'll trace it to the quiet decisions made long ago. The printing presses of the 1980s, the bailouts of 2008, the stimulus of 2020, the sanctions of 2022, and finally to that fateful night in 1971 when Richard Nixon severed the link between money and truth. Because that night didn't just end the gold standard. It ended accountability. And once money lost its anchor, everything built upon it. Democracy, trust, equality, stability began to drift. The world is not ending. It's resetting. A new financial order is rising, one not built on promises, but on production, energy, and technology. The dollar story is not over, but its era of unquestioned supremacy is. The countdown that began in 1971 is reaching zero. The age of illusions is ending. And what comes next will redefine what money and power truly mean. When Nixon cut the dollar loose from gold, something extraordinary happened. Money became limitless, and so did human greed. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the US discovered a new kind of power, not industrial, not military, but financial. Instead of conquering territories, it conquered balance sheets. Instead of gold reserves, it controlled the world's credit system. Wall Street became the new battlefield. The Federal Reserve, once a cautious guardian of monetary stability, turned into an architect of controlled inflation. Printing money to fund wars, rescue corporations, and inflate asset bubbles that made people feel rich even when their real purchasing power was falling. It was the era of the illusion of wealth. The United States stopped producing what the world needed and started producing what the world desired: dollars, debt, and dreams. Foreign nations accepted this because they had no choice. After the collapse of Bretton Woods, the U.S. struck a silent pact with oil producers. In 1973, Saudi Arabia agreed to sell oil exclusively in dollars, creating the petrodollar system. From that moment on, every nation needed dollars to buy energy, meaning every nation needed to hold U.S. debt. America had found the perfect business model. Export inflation, import real goods. Factories left Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. Jobs went to Asia, where labor was cheaper. But in Washington and Wall Street, nobody cared. Because while production moved abroad, profits stayed home. The US could simply print what others had to earn. By the 1990s, the system reached its peak. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The dollar was unchallenged. The era of globalization began, powered by cheap credit and American financial dominance. The Washington Consensus became gospel: to regulate, privatize, open your markets, and peg your currency to the dollar. It looked like a miracle. The Dow Jones soared. Tech billionaires were born. The average American felt rich again, but it was a mirage built on leverage. Debt replaced savings. Consumption replaced production. And finance replaced reality. Then came 2008, the moment the illusion cracked. Decades of deregulation and cheap money had created a monster: the global shadow banking system. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, the financial world came within hours of total paralysis. To save it, the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars. And in doing so, it confirmed the final truth of the post-1971 system. Money was no longer created by labor or production. It was created by panic. Instead of letting the system reset, the Fed doubled down. Interest rates fell to zero. Quantitative easing flooded markets with liquidity. Every crisis was solved by creating more money, more debt, more dependency. The result? The rich got richer. Corporations used free credit to buy back their own stocks. Asset prices exploded: housing, equities, bonds, while real wages barely moved. The gap between those who owned assets and those who didn't became a chasm. Meanwhile, foreign nations started to realize what the U.S. had done. They weren't holding wealth in U.S. treasuries. They were holding IOUs. Paper promises that could be inflated, frozen, or confiscated at any time. China, Russia, and others began to quietly build alternatives. The SIPS system to replace SWIFT, trade in yuan instead of dollars. Massive gold accumulation by central banks. The pillars of the petrodollar began to tremble, not from revolution, but from mathematics. Because here's the truth: no empire can live forever on borrowed time and borrowed money. The US turned the dollar into the world's bloodstream, but it poisoned the system with its own excess. By 2025, the illusion is cracking again, this time not from a housing bubble, but from history itself. Every empire that believed its money was invincible, Spain, Britain, the USSR, ended the same way: overextended, overconfident, and broke. The difference is that America built its empire on digital numbers instead of gold coins. And when numbers lose trust, the fall is faster than ever before.